Moving on to Commission General Regulation 458, electronic triggers, rifle triggers, caliber and cartridge length, and smokeless powder restrictions. LCB file number R144-15, Chief Game Warden Tyler Turnipseed for possible action. The Commission will consider adopting an amendment to Chapter 503 of the Nevada Administrative Code. The proposed regulation amendment contains several changes. The first change will clarify the use of black powder substitutes that are considered smokeless powder. The second change would make it legal to hunt big game mammals with a handgun if the handgun uses a centerfire cartridge of 22 or larger and has a barrel length of 4 inches or more. The third change would make it unlawful to hunt a big game mammal with a rifle using a centerfire cartridge larger than 50 caliber or with a case length longer than 3 inches. The amendment would also make it unlawful to hunt a big game mammal with any firearm equipped with any sighting system using a computer or electronically controlled firing mechanism. 2 workshops have been held on this regulation change, one on January 29, 2016, and one on March 25, 2016. The Commission directed the Department to change 3.8 inches overall loaded length to 3 inches case length and change .46 caliber or larger to larger than 50 caliber. Change the minimum legal handgun cartridge to caliber 22 or larger, and change electronic or computer controlled trigger to sighting system using a computer or electronically controlled firing mechanism. Another hearing was held on June 25th. However, the Commission only allowed public comment and the Commission did not discuss the regulation. Chief Turnipseed.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. Chief Game Warden Tyler Turnipseed for the record. As you said, this regulation has been around. We've been batting it around for 6 or 8 months now. I had prepared a PowerPoint back in January and March at those meetings. I thought it would be a little bit redundant to show that again today with the possible exception of our 2 new commissioners. But for anyone who hasn't seen that PowerPoint, you can go back and look in support material from the January or the March meeting that has a lot of videos and photos, visual references as to some of the stuff we're talking about. So as the chairman just explained, this regulation has evolved sort of into 4 different parts. So what I'll do is I'll hit them briefly and then I'll go through each one individually and we can talk about them, and then some of the public comment correspondence that has come in over the last 6 or 8 months. So the first section talks about the use of smokeless powder versus black powder. The second portion is removing some of the restrictions on cartridge length for handgun hunting. The third section is talking about electronically controlled firing mechanisms. And then the fourth section, which became the more controversial part, talks about rifles using a centerfire cartridge bigger than 50 caliber or a case length greater than 3 inches. So that first part, the use of smokeless powder, this dates back to 2013 and a petition that asked to legalize the use of Blackhorn 209 powder for muzzleloader hunting. When we got to looking into it, Blackhorn 209 had become a popular powder, shoots very clean. You can shoot a lot of shots without running a patch through your barrel. Got to looking at it, turns out by the chemical makeup of Blackhorn 209, it's considered a smokeless powder. Therefore, it was illegal. So in response to that petition, the commission at the time looked at it and made a regulation change, but still left in the sentence, the use of smokeless powder is prohibited. So in an effort to clean that up, in order to legalize Blackhorn 209, that sentence would have to come out, the use of smokeless powder is prohibited. Quite honestly, it's difficult to enforce in the field what's smokeless powder and what's not. So from a practicality standpoint, we don't necessarily need that sentence from an enforcement standpoint, and it would clear up any confusion as to whether Blackhorn 209 is legal or other similar black powder substitutes would be legal. So that's part 1. Part 2 was a suggestion from this board, I believe at the June meeting, that talks about hunting with a handgun. And what that section would do is remove, if you look on page 2, used to be subsection 5, A and B, talked about overall loaded length of 2 inches or more for a handgun, or cartridge of caliber 24 or larger with a case length no less than the length of the case of a cartridge for a Remington Magnum of caliber 44. My whole career I've thought that definition was confusing and hard to understand. And it sounded like it was the desire to this board to remove those restrictions on the handgun, simplify that just to say that a handgun is legal to hunt with as long as it uses a cartridge of caliber 22 or larger and has a barrel length of 4 inches or more. One thing I wanted to point out that's a little bit of a language nuance that I talked with prior Chairman Drew over. If you look at Section 4 on page 3, it says a person may hunt big game mammals with a, and it used to say rifle if the rifle uses, et cetera, et cetera. When that language was struck out, rifle if the rifle uses a centerfire cartridge, it essentially took out the permissive language allowing you to hunt with a rifle. It goes on later to describe what rifles would be unlawful to hunt with, but it would take out the fact that it says you may hunt with a rifle. Now the parent statute to this, NRS 503-150, I believe, that says you may hunt with a rifle as long as it exerts 1,000 foot-pounds of energy, that definition that's in statute. But this particular NAC would not give permissive language to hunt with a rifle. Little nuance that I didn't catch initially, but I think LCB would be fine with a last-minute change there. Sentence number, or section 4, to say a person may hunt big game mammals with a rifle or then it would jump down to handgun if the handgun uses a centerfire cartridge. So it would be the addition of 3 words, rifle or a. Person may hunt big game mammals with a rifle or a handgun if the handgun uses a centerfire cartridge. I'm guessing that LCB won't have a problem with adding in those 3 little words, but when we're done, I'd be interested in the board's comments on that addition.
Yeah, Commissioner Drew.
Just, Tyler, a quick question on that. I think there was also maybe some concern on the centerfire cartridge portion of that in terms of the language used to prohibit the use of rimfires, if I'm not mistaken. And with the change, not only is it not giving you permission to use a rifle necessarily, but it also changed whether or not you could use a rimfire. So are you suggesting that we give the permissive language for rifle but not worry about centerfire?
No, I think that's a good point, and I actually forgot that you and I talked about that. I think we could simply add in the word centerfire there, and it would clear that up. A person may hunt big game mammals with a centerfire rifle or a handgun if the handgun uses, et cetera, et cetera. Would that make sense? Essentially, practically speaking, with the handgun language, what this change would do, it would basically allow hunting with some of the smaller handgun rounds. Most semi-automatic handgun rounds that are popular, such as 9mm, 40 caliber, 45 ACP, under the prior regulation, those were all prohibited rounds because they didn't meet that cartridge length. The only handgun cartridges that did meet the length were 357, 41 mag, 44 mag, 45 long Colt. Generally didn't become an issue except for lion hunters. Oftentimes a lion hunter would bring in a lion that was shot with a 40 or a 9mm. Since a mountain lion is considered a big game mammal, we were in a little bit of a tight spot on those because they unknowingly killed a mountain lion with a prohibited handgun round. This language change would essentially allow those. It would open it up to the use of a 9mm, a 40 or a 45 ACP for lion hunters is what it would practically do. Moving on, I don't know if you wanted to do questions individually on each section or overall after I'm done, but you want me to keep going through each section?
I think go ahead and we'll
Okay.
questions at the end.
Moving down, subsection 5 there, this would basically be part 3 of the regulation change. Would make it unlawful to hunt a big game mammal with any firearm that is equipped with any sighting system using a computer or electronically controlled firing mechanism. For those that were at the January and March meetings, we had some video on that. It's essentially in response to what are called smart rifles. It's a company called Tracking Point Rifles, and I think there are some other companies popping up as well that have developed this technology in which you essentially get laser lock on your target. You push a button on the side of the rifle when you want to get laser lock on your target. The rifle acquires laser lock. The rifle takes into account on its own computerized mechanism, takes into account barometric pressure and bullet velocity and curvature of the earth and all these factors. And then you depress the trigger. When the crosshairs move over your laser lock point, the rifle fires itself. That company, Tracking Point Rifles, in their promotional videos, guarantees ½ an inch accuracy at distances up to a mile on targets moving at up to 30 miles per hour. Clearly great technology for use, you know, in a military setting, war type setting, but probably something that goes a little bit beyond most people's definition of fair chase when you get laser lock on a target and then the rifle fires itself with half-inch accuracy at targets moving 30 miles per hour at a mile away. The fourth and final language change to this regulation is the part that became controversial and we got a lot of public correspondence on. Basically says, be unlawful to hunt a big game mammal with a rifle if the rifle uses a centerfire cartridge that is smaller than caliber 22, that's just language that got taken out in an earlier section, or larger than caliber 50, or a centerfire cartridge with a case length of more than 3 inches. Essentially some history behind that. The regulation is written to prevent hunting big game mammals with a 50 BMG or a 416 Barrett, some of these great big rifles that have come out and become a little bit more publicly available in recent years. So as I'm sure you guys have seen, we got a ton of public comment on this issue. Personally, I'm a little bit mystified as to how some of the correspondence has tried to draw a connection between this regulation change and the Second Amendment. I don't see it as a Second Amendment issue. Most of the form letters we got called this a 50 caliber ban, and clearly it's a misuse of the term ban. Neither this commission nor this department has the desire or the authority to ban any sort of firearm. The regulation does not prohibit owning a 50 BMG, target shooting with a 50 BMG, hunting unprotected wildlife with a 50 BMG, defending one's home, fighting terrorism with a 50 BMG. It addresses none of those things. It just talks about hunting big game mammals. It merely sets an upper limit on how big of a firearm a person can use to hunt big game mammals. If the limit's not set to keep someone from shooting an elk at a mile away with a 50 BMG, then where is the upper limit? Where do we draw the line? Is it somewhere below a 50 BMG, somewhere above? Do we not draw a line? Those are the questions that I think everyone's asking. If we don't draw the line there, is it some sort of a cannon that will allow? I just got an email this morning about someone that had developed a 95 caliber rifle, basically a bullet an inch around. We got a ton of form letters from different groups. I certainly I can't speak for every one of them. I would grab a sampling of those and look at them when I got a chance. A lot of them that I looked at were from out of state. Most of them don't hunt in Nevada when I looked up their names, or at least don't apply for big game tags in Nevada. Certainly doesn't apply to all of them, but a lot of them. Those letters stated that there's no science behind this proposal. As we know, many of our topics that we talk about here talk about managing public perception, and don't necessarily apply to scientific survey data. Those form letters stated that the regulation would prohibit hunting with such popular hunting cartridges as the 470 Nitro Express, 500 Nitro Express, 505 Gibbs, 577 Nitro Express, and 50 BMG. Now, this regulation was designed to prohibit the 50 BMG, the 470 Nitro Express, 500 Nitro Express. Those rounds aren't really capable of killing things at a mile away, but the way it's drawn, it affects those. I struggle a little bit with those being called popular hunting cartridges. I think in terms of Cape buffalo and lions, they're probably pretty popular. I think in my 20 years in the field, I've never seen any of those rounds. Some of the letters we've gotten have questioned the authority of the commission to set a limit on the size of hunting rifles, and I struggle with that one a little bit as well. I think that's exactly one of the commission's duties and authorities. The commission promulgates hunting, fishing, and trapping regulations through the establishment of seasons, limits, and method of take. Obviously, this is about method of take. Method of take in the NACs talk about minimum sizes of hunting firearms. We just talked about that. Maximum sizes of hunting firearms. For decades, a person has been prohibited from hunting waterfowl with a shotgun larger than 10 gauge. Statute prohibits the use of fully automatic firearms, incendiary bullets, and tracers. Migratory birds can only be hunted with a shotgun limited to 3 shells or less. We don't get form letters protesting about a person's right to hunt ducks with an 8 gauge holding 10 shells. Statutes and regulations prohibit the use of spotlights, hunting deer with dogs, and baiting deer with apples. These are all limits placed on method of take to limit excessive advantages over big game mammals that go beyond fair chase. We just heard a regulation proposal about fishing, talking about method of take. Barbless hooks, single barbless hooks on the Truckee River. I don't see this as being much different. We set limits on the use of treble hooks, number of hooks on a person's line, or the number of lines a person can have in the water. I've actually heard the analogy used in some of the public correspondence about a 50 BMG being used to hunt deer, similar to throwing a stick of dynamite in a fishing hole. A little bit of overkill. I got this bottle opener sort of just as a novelty item, but found it interesting and timely that it popped up. And it's made out of a 50 BMG round. I'll pass it around so you guys can see it. On the back, it talks about the history of the 50 caliber BMG. It says, when the 50 caliber Browning machine gun round was introduced in 1921, it revolutionized the heavy machine gun small cannon. It has been used in every war since then by many countries around the world and remains the most popular and accurate long-range military round today. The 50 BMG round is large and powerful enough to sink ships, shoot down low-flying aircraft, disable vehicles, and hit targets over 1.5 miles away. I'll pass this around. Just a little bit of a visual aid to put it in perspective of how big that round is. Just looking through a few of the numbers, a 30-06, probably the most common hunting round of the last 100 years. Generally produces 2,000 to 3,000 foot-pounds of energy at the muzzle. Depending on the loads, a 50 BMG can produce 10,000 to 15,000 pounds of energy, 5 times that of a 30-06. When you get downrange a little bit, most 50 BMG rounds have more energy at 1,000 yards than a 300 Win Mag has at the muzzle. Just a few things to put that in perspective. So that's kind of what we're looking at. That's the background behind it. Simply talking about fair chase, public perception when things go beyond a limit of what a lot of people would consider socially acceptable. Again, I would ask, if we don't set the limit here for the 50 BMG, where is the limit? Do we set a limit? That's all I have, and I'd stand for questions.
Thank you, Chief Turnipseed. Questions from the commission for Chief? Commissioner Hubbs.
I have a question just because it came up while Mr. Turnipseed was speaking about the use of this only for big game mammals, and I guess I was under the impression when I was researching this a bit is that it was to be used, you know, that there would be a regulation for all wildlife, but that's not the case then. Is that correct?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Commissioner Hubbs, Chief Game Warden Turnipseed again. This particular regulation is talking about hunting big game mammals. There aren't a lot of other classifications of wildlife that are hunted with rifles, possible exception being unprotected wildlife and maybe some fur bearers. Unprotected wildlife would include things like coyotes, badgers, raccoons, skunks, that sort of stuff. We don't place any restriction on method of take for those, so it would still be allowed there. For fur bearers, it wouldn't affect that one. It's pretty much just dealing with big game mammals.
But at the same time, if we're saying they're too powerful for big game mammals, wouldn't they be too powerful for those types of wildlife as well?
One could make that argument. It would open up a couple different NAC chapters, but yes.
Commissioner Drew.
Tyler, thanks for the discussion, but I was just curious, and I think it had come up several times, but I want to make sure it's on our radar. In terms of 5A and the sighting systems, I know there's been some previous discussion in terms of some of the handicap hunts that go on, and I think you've had conversations with Nevada Outdoorsmen in Wheelchairs and maybe the Dreamkeeper Foundation out of Winnemucca, but just to reaffirm that they are comfortable with this language in terms of some of the systems they use on the handicap hunts.
That's a great point. Thanks for reminding me on that one, Commissioner Drew. Yeah, when we initially wrote this, we wrote it a little bit incorrectly, saying any firearm that is equipped with an electronic trigger. It was pointed out to us at the Yarrington meeting that better terminology would be using a computer or electronically controlled firing mechanism. I think that verbiage more appropriately describes it. And I did. I reached out to, I'm aware of 2 organized nonprofit groups that do hunts for disabled people, one being Cody Lauk Dreamkeeper Foundation in Winnemucca, and the other one being Nevada Outdoorsmen in Wheelchairs. Reached out to them specifically through former Commissioner Bliss, ran that language by them, and they all agreed that this regulation would not affect what they do. I actually took the chance to get out in the field a couple weeks ago and go on patrol again to shake off the desk cobwebs that I had accumulated over the last year. And as part of that patrol, it was opening weekend of antelope season, and I went to Battle Mountain and talked to the Nevada Outdoorsmen and Wheelchairs crew. They just finished conducting their hunts that morning on the alfalfa fields at the TS Ranch east of Battle Mountain, and they were more than happy to show me all the equipment they used, the chairs, the firing setups, you know, the rifle rest. They had 2 disabled hunters there that had killed their antelope that morning, and essentially what they have is a little hydraulic ram that screws to the trigger guard, and when they depress the trigger button, it depresses the trigger. Wouldn't be affected by this language that talks about a computer or electronically controlled firing mechanism. I think that language draws the connection where the scope is talking to the trigger, or maybe not the trigger, but the firing pin. The scope is communicating with the fire pin to know when to launch the round, is what Tracking Point calls it. So, yeah, that was a long answer to a short question, but to shorten that up, the two organizations are good with this language. They don't feel it'll affect what they do.
Further questions from the commission? Commissioner Hubbs.
While I was reading through our public comments, what was interesting, it was a gentleman, and I believe he was a Nevada resident, but on the topic that we were speaking about yesterday, in his letter I wrote down, he had written, quote unquote, "I finally got enough points after 4 years of negative results. He remembers when he could buy a deer tag anywhere." I thought that was interesting because I'm trying to get at how long you have to wait to get a deer tag. So this gentleman, through his comment, inadvertently had told me 4 years for him.
Further comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll take.
I have some comments before public comment, I think.
Okay. Vice Chairman Johnston.
Thank you, Chairman Wallace. I got a number of correspondence, as many did, and a lot of the comments centered on allegations or the assertion that if this commission was to adopt this regulation, it would infringe upon the Second Amendment rights of individuals. And so when I get correspondence like that, I take that assertion very seriously. I don't, as a commissioner, want to do anything that would impede upon the rights of anyone, whether that's a Second Amendment right or any other right guaranteed under the Constitution. And so, I started looking, and I went back and I don't mean to reiterate what Chief Game Warden Turnipseed indicated, but I just went through, just on the website alone of the Department of Wildlife, the number of restrictions that already exist on what you can and cannot hunt with. With respect to upland game birds, for wild turkey, there is a limitation that no larger than 10 gauge nor smaller than 20, and it further goes on to talk about the type of shot that may be used, a shot size no larger than 2. There's minimum caliber restrictions, automatic weapons are banned, limitations on the types of shotguns that can be used and ammunition that can be used for mountain lions and deer. So I was thinking, wow, if we were to accept this argument that a caliber restriction for rifles infringes on the Second Amendment, do we have to then abandon all these other weapon restrictions, because the suggestion is you get to use whatever you want in any manner you want? At least that seems to be the argument presented. Now, I have been accused in the past of overstepping my bounds by engaging in legal research, but that's what I do. I want to go find out and answer for myself whether or not this is a true Second Amendment issue. So I went back and I started reading, and really there's one case to really read in this regard, and that's when the Supreme Court defined the right guaranteed under the Second Amendment in District of Columbia versus Heller. And I read through that decision. And I don't see in any way how this proposed regulation implicates, let alone violates, the Second Amendment. So I'd ask that if people are going to make that suggestion or that allegation during public comment, to please explain why. Because it doesn't affect your ability to own or possess any type of weapon. It just limits how you can use a certain type of weapon, as other regulations do. That seems to comport with what the Supreme Court said is certainly permissible in their decision in Heller. I'd ask the people that are going to talk about a Second Amendment violation, why is there no opposition to the electronic firing mechanism? I haven't seen any opposition to that. If it's the position you can hunt with whatever you want, then we should be hearing the same Second Amendment argument in regard to the prohibition on the electronically controlled rifles, and I haven't heard that. So there seems to be some inconsistencies. I find it ironic people say that, you know, popular hunting cartridges, and Chief Game Warden Turnipseed noted those. I've had the opportunity to be on a hunt where some of those larger calibers were carried, but it also happened to be in a situation where we were at times 40 yards from Cape Buffalo bulls in a swamp in Mozambique where you're hunting dangerous game. It's an entirely different scenario than what we're talking about here. So I hope that if the public comment is going to continue to suggest that this proposed regulation violates the Second Amendment, then an explanation be given, because there's just allegations thrown out there with no analysis, and it doesn't seem to comport with the language of what the Second Amendment says, how the Supreme Court's defined that right, and it seems to me that we certainly have the authority to adopt regulations regarding the method of take, and that would be this type of regulation. So I don't think we're overstepping our bounds. So I hope those who, and I'm assuming people are here, given the amount of correspondence we received, are going to speak in opposition to this regulation, answer some of these questions. And I anticipate someone may say, well, I can't answer those types of questions because I can't engage in the legal analysis of the Second Amendment. And my response to that is, then don't make the allegation that we're considering a regulation that violates a constitutional right if you can't explain how it does so. So with that, I'm sure I'm going to have more comments after public comment, but I'm really struggling to see how this proposed regulation and limiting caliber size and cartridge size impacts anyone's constitutional rights as it's been defined. So.
Anything further from the commission? Hearing none, I'll take it out to public comment. We'll start in Elko, and I just want to make sure that you guys, when you come up to speak, let us know if you are representing a group or something like that, so that we know we're not cutting you off in the middle of your presentation.
Remind them to complete the comment cards.
Yes, and complete a yellow comment card so we have that for the record for Suzanne to put the minutes together and keep that straight. So we'll start.